From Inwood in New York City, welcome to Inwood Art Works On Air. It's where we meet the writers, theater makers, filmmakers, and artists of all stripes who make their home what we affectionately call upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and today we welcome local filmmaker and musician, Stephen Mallorca. As a director, editor, and director of photography, Stephen has produced a large body of work that spans across narrative, documentary, commercial, music video, film, on all fronts. Steve's co-directed, edited, and shot A Peloton of One, which won the 2020 Greenwich International Film Audience Award at the festival, and served as the director of photography and editor of the 2015 ESPN documentary The Last Trophy. His directorial feature debut, Slow Jam King, was hailed by the New York Times as, quote, do-it-yourself filmmaking at its purest, with spirited characters and high levels of comic energy, and won Asian Cinevision's Emerging Director Award. Steve is also the series editor for San Francisco Opera's 2022 Webby Award-winning documentary series In Song, as well as Cleveland Orchestra performance and documentary series In Focus. He is also an independent musician, and in December 2022, he released his third album under the moniker Sulu and Excelsior, quote, So Ends the Honeymoon, to critical acclaim. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk to Steve about everything he's ever done. Just kidding. But we're going to talk about his music and film career and, of course, his affinity for the northern Manhattan neighborhoods of Inwood and Washington Heights. Steve, welcome to Inwood Art Works On Air. Thank you for being here and taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
You bet. You bet. So, obviously, a very creative person, to say the least. Yeah. So, were you raised in an artistic family? Like, where did the passion for music and storytelling come from?
I don't consider my parents like traditionally creative. They didn't do creative careers or anything, but I consider them ultra creative people. They're always making things. My mom, is always, going from one hobby to another, sewing things, the embroidery of, all that. And my dad is an engineer, so was always, when we were little, he was always drawing sketches and doing things. And as I found out later, as I got older, he had all these patents from, like just the everyday cans, aluminum cans. And, he did all these patents that kind of designed the machines that made like how you open up cans and all that stuff. So wow. I remember just growing up with these models of cans coming into the house and different soda. And it was the first time I ever had Dr. Pepper because he brought in all these cases of Dr. Pepper with this newfangled can. And so while they weren't artists per se, they were, to me, very creative people. And I think they fostered that sort of atmosphere. So, I guess like good old Asian families, I took piano lessons and that sort of thing. But from the piano, I ended up finding band, school bands and that sort of thing, and taking trumpet, and then just kind of picking up more and more instruments as I went along. And so music really was kind of my first creative love. Mm-hmm. And then I found film, a lot later. But.
Well, you seem to continually, from that young man in high school, to continue to successfully navigate both filmmaking and music paths. So congratulations on being an adult and being able to do both.
Thanks.
And has each informed the other in your progression? Like, did music help you bridge to filmmaking in some way? Just curious.
I think so. I feel like my filmmaking is definitely informed by, what music has taught me. When you play in a band or in a large, like an orchestra or something, the first thing you're taught is to listen mm-hmm. to your other players. And I thought I did it pretty decently. When it helps you harmonize and make sure you're in tune. And I think that is, one aspect of what I bring into film. I try to be, a good listener. I try to look at the big picture. When you're playing a trumpet part, in a vacuum, you're playing one note every 8 measures, 28 measures, and you have to make sure you hit that one note, and then you're resting for another like 40 pages or something, then you have to come back in. And so it might seem like you're just doing that one note, but then being able to imagine how you're fitting into the big picture is an important part of film because there are so many different parts of the film. And being able to always keep an eye on the big picture. What is the final product?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of helped me. And then just simple things like in terms of rhythm, there's rhythm in everything, rhythm in dialogue. There's rhythm in movement visually, even without having music per se. But, I think everything, whether or not there's music in it or it's just ambient sound, everything visually should have a rhythm to it. And you want to have that pace throughout a film. And throughout a scene, different pace for different scenes, different kind of emotions that you want. And I think the rhythm is a big part of that.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And keeping your, being part of something bigger than yourself too, that big picture of seeing the full song, the full score, including the full screenplay.
Yeah.
And knowing where it's going, right?
Yes.
And keeping it moving forward. Pretty cool. Do you, I would say, are you happy now where you are in your journey with how you started and where you are now? Like where you're at, just thinking back, like in your high school, you're aspiring to be in a band that, I don't know, what were the bands you were growing up? Like, were you listening to like Led Zeppelin or Jaco Pastorius or
it was all over the place.
I figured you're kind of a jazz guy.
Yeah.
I know you are, but I would figure it's like, did you want to go out and go on a tour? And so I'm just curious, like, if you, it's hindsight's 2020, and I'm sure you're happy where you are now, but just curious of like, what would you say to young Steven right now?
I would say, be patient.
Yeah.
Because, I think patience is definitely kind of one of my stronger suits. It might also be one of the weaker suits as well. Sometimes you could be too patient. But I think it's helped me. And, I remember early on kind of being advised in both the different areas that at one point or another I would have to pick sides. And I understand that. In terms of, kind of more immediately finding a lane, that's probably more of a thing. But that's also, I think, a little more indicative of the time. This was like, during the late 90s when this was happening. So a totally different environment as it is now, where I think people are really kind of embraced being all over the place and being very DIY and controlling, everything that you want to be able to do. But, at the time when I was, trying to learn the ropes of these different things, and I was starting up a band, and we were doing the record label thing, and at the same token I was trying to learn the ropes and move up the ladder at a production company, starting as an office PA, then going to editing, then eventually directing. And early on people were advising me that was something that I would have to probably pick and choose at some point to get a relative amount of success. And so while maybe that might have been, maybe the ascent might have been faster in any of those different areas. I knew early on, especially when we were doing the record label chase before, it wasn't something that my band and I, like, we were all brothers and really good friends, basically. And, after a certain point, we wanted to do it on our own terms. And we decided the independent route was really the best thing for us. After spending like 2 years with, producers that were trying to get us signed and that sort of thing. So, once that kind of came clear, for me, a lot of things came clear in terms of like how I wanted to kind of pursue things in my overall life path. And now I'm at that point where, thankfully, I've actually been able to meld, the music and the film worlds, like very much so in terms of my own music. I'm doing all the visuals for all my music videos and, documentaries, or I did a visual album a few years ago, in 2021. And it's an important component now for independent artists in general, just to have that. And then on the flip side, on the film side, I'm ecstatic that I've been doing this work for San Francisco Opera, Cleveland Orchestra, where my music knowledge and music background really helps
absolutely
in editing these pieces, and it gives a comfort level with who I'm working with too. Many of whom are ultra talented, classically trained musicians who went to conservatory for that, but being able to kind of come to the same place but from different sides. They're musicians that kind of come to film, and I'm a filmmaker that came to music. And now we're meeting in this place. I'm really happy with that, and obviously now, like with my new documentary, that is bliss for me because it's music and film, and it's music that I love, and it's somebody that has inspired me. So I'm happy.
Well, that's great. I mean, it's really, thank you for a lovely answer, and it's wonderful to see how the devotion to both forms. You don't have to feel like you have to serve one master over another. And they both inform. And yeah, sure. I mean, come on. Everybody would wish they spent more time on any given day doing something else. Maybe it's because it's the nature of human beings. Grass is always greener, right? Exactly. But I think it's wonderful. You have found a balance, and also I think it's a great lesson to people listening out there. You don't have to choose. You can keep the passion firing for both. And which leads me to my question about your passion for documentary filmmaking. Do you? I said, what about the form that speaks to you? Because that's your film coming up, Play It and Woo.
The ironic thing is when I went into film, I went to NYU for film school, and I was fully all about narrative and wanting to do like narrative feature films and that sort of thing. And I always appreciated documentaries because I always knew that the editorial aspect was just monstrous. I feel like documentaries are really created in the edit room, and as somebody that was interested in editing being sort of a pathway to directing and making my own films, I always appreciated that. But at the same token, for me, it wasn't something that, as a director or a producer, that I didn't feel like it was necessarily the medium for me to be able to tell stories early on. But as I started, working more commercially, I was at a production company, and then I went freelance, and I started taking on, a couple of documentary jobs. One of the first one I was directing and shooting and editing. It was a series of pharmaceutical documentaries where we essentially had to embed ourselves with people that had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was really powerful. It was a pharmaceutical corporate video, informational in terms of how somebody that was diagnosed with this can kind of go about, giving themselves the self-knowledge to be able to advise, to possibly look through different kind of, medicine. And then these are all people that took this specific kind of medication at the time. So there was that aspect of it, but it wasn't really a commercial. That was like one small part of it. The rest of it was really about like the mindset that these people had as they kind of went through their cancer journeys. And it was, probably the most, emotionally involved, that I'd been in with a film job at that time. And I was incredibly moved by it. And, by, spending 3-4 days with people who, some of whom are no longer here. But it's, it was inspiring, obviously. And I felt like I had a real kind of obligation to be able to honor their stories and tell them in a proper way. And that's what I appreciated about that job, because it was really, even though it was in a commercial job, it wasn't a commercial. It was really, they're like, let these pieces be as long as they had to be. We were really more about telling their story. And so that was my first taste in it. And after that, it was really like, I really got interested in it, and then after that, I worked on The Lost Trophy for, which ended up being on ESPN. And again, that was another thing. I didn't know, I knew nothing about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma before, and the same thing went with The Lost Trophy. I knew nothing about lacrosse, and it was a documentary about this lacrosse team that played at Syracuse in the early '90s, and they were this historic team, and I just loved learning about it. And I loved, kind of really getting neck deep into it and immersing myself in it. But also I enjoyed being sort of a fresh eye on something. You're around people that are so deep into it, whether it was these survivors or doctors, or in the case of The Lost Trophy, you're around like these lacrosse lifers and people that grew up playing this since the age of 5. And I hear somebody that didn't, but it was nice to be able to kind of give a new perspective and be excited about things that maybe they might have thought, oh, it's kind of boring at this point. But they're like, oh yeah, you're right. It is kind of a fun aspect of it. And I think it gives a good balance in terms of like being able to tell a story. And so that was, and then after that, that was when I was really like, going full tilt into like wanting to, find stories to be able to produce and direct. So that led into everything else, basically.
Wow. Well, I couldn't think of a better reason why to do docs, because it moves you and emotionally fills your soul.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. And so that leads you to your current project, Play It and Woo.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us more about that?
Play It and Woo, in a lot of ways, beyond just being about music and film, it's something that's really kind of encapsulated, last 30 years for me. Play It and Woo is about a keyboardist by the name of Philip Woo. He's a fifth generation Chinese American musician from Seattle. And he's basically, to me, he's an unsung hero, because he at the age of 17 was picked up by the 70s jazz, soul, funk great vibraphonist Roy Ayers. And Roy Ayers picked him up at the age of 17 to play a gig with him. And ever since then, he kind of became this name that just started playing with bigger and bigger names. And he played with Frankie Beverly and Mays, Patti LaBelle, Ashford and Simpson, and the list goes on, Whitney Houston. And he became a big session player throughout the 80s. But he really kind of built this huge catalog, just with, just even from Roy Ayers and Frankie Beverly and Mays. He was a mainstay of those bands and became a crowd favorite, and was a big part of a lot of their discographies. So when those groups became sampled by hip hop in the 90s, a lot of that by default was Philip Woo that you were hearing in those samples. Like in the song Everybody Loves the Sunshine, you hear the synthesizer. That's like Philip Woo, and like all those keyboard parts was Philip Woo playing it. And for me, as not only a musician, but also as an Asian American musician, and I was, in college at the time and really heavily into hip hop. And I remember first seeing the vinyl for Everybody Loves the Sunshine, and, total 70s, black guys with fros, like the beautiful design of it, great jazz kind of composition photos in the back. And then all of a sudden, out of like, all these pictures with afros and braids, then all of a sudden you see like this one Chinese guy with like, like this long hair and these big glasses. And I was like, who is this? And I see Philip Woo. I was like, and for somebody like me, who was playing, a Filipino American guy that was trying to play in hip hop, I obviously was struck by that. And I was something that I was like, who was this? And, already trying to do the research and seeing like, oh, wow, this guy played on all these records. He was sampled on all these hip hop songs that I love. And then, when I started working, I graduated from film school, I started interning. Ironically, I started working at a production company that was owned and, by Philip Woo's two older brothers.
That's incredible.
And it took me a while before I even realized that, because, I went there because, they were doing music videos at the time for all the groups that I loved: Tribe Called Quest, Black Sheep, Public Enemy, Living Color, all these groups that, so for me, I was like, I had an internship there and I was loving it. And then they hired me full time. And then, that's when I started kind of learning the ropes in the film business, but at the same token, finding out that, wait, these are the same Woos as Philip Woo. And so it kind of led to that. And so I wanted to do this film about him. His story moved me, and I thought everybody should know about it. And a lot of people do, which is the great thing. But as that music has changed, as it gets older, less and less people are around to really kind of tell that story. And also by virtue of him being an Asian American player that's within this, there's a degree of invisibility, even though he's very visible because he's like the only guy that's there on stage, doing that. But so many people don't realize that, that this guy was a big part of it. I'm not trying to say that he was the writer of these songs and that type of thing. He was just a great musician that was picked up at a young age and was just an inspirational figure that was able to kind of come out of very difficult circumstances and, really ascend, and still keeps on grinding and is making music still to this day.
And so you're going to highlight his story in a future documentary, right?
Yeah, so that's what Play It and Woo is. and Played and Woo is going to be. We've already been trying to film with him as much as we can, but I remember I approached him because I had known him for a while now, just through the family, and he'd worked on a couple of jobs that we did when I was at that production company. And that was, secretly inside, I'm like, oh man, I can't believe I'm working with Philip Wu. He was scoring the music for it, and I was editing. And he knew that I also played music, and he was digging the stuff of my band, PIC, at that time. And he was, he was helpful. He was trying to get us studios to record in, and we were always really cool with each other. And then so I finally, after I'd finished A Peloton of One, I knew, I wanted to get going on the next film. And at that point, I was like, "This is the time to tell." Was he open to your? He was, but his, he's just the nicest guy. So he's never gonna say, no. But he was kind of like, well, why would you want to do a film about me? That's kind of his thing,
Yeah.
And I gave him, that explanation. I told him what I told you about how he moved me and inspired me, and how I know that he's inspired generations of, musicians like me, myself. But I also felt that it was an important part of that musical history to be able to tell his side, just to show that, there is a piece of the pie that, that is ours, and that could be something that everybody can relate to. People are part of what you make yourself part of,
And how, so when you first approached him, and where you are now, in you're finishing it up, we'll just say.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned through this process with him? Because you thought you knew him then, now you really know him really well.
What I've found out about him is that, he's always 100% real. Like, he was never putting on these fronts even when I first met him. The stories, that he told just kind of on surface level when, ages ago when I first met him, he's been able to tell them still, and now just much more in depth, but it's the heart and the sentiment has always been in the same place. So that's the first thing. He and his family, they're an amazing family. It's a mixture of they're rooted in activism. They've always been very kind of politically based. Their family has roots in Seattle's political history. And that's always informed them. But at the same token, there was something about Philip that really kind of cut against the grain of really how our notion, how popular kind of mainstream notions of Asian Americans are. He was really like a rebel, like kind of a wild child, a product of the 60s. Like he was the youngest of siblings, and he grew up with this odd mix of hippies around the corner, but the Black Panther office on the other corner. And, they're the only Asian family in Seattle Central District, which at the time was primarily African-American. And that was another, kind of point of tension, because he was, being one of the only Asian kids there, that led into a lot of, kind of racially, motivated attacks against him because he was Asian. Yeah. And then the irony there is but at the same time, most of the times it ends up being these stories that were almost basically like black gangs versus Asian gang type of stories. And, but then he ends up really making his name as a very important musician within a black music form. And it's informed to him, but there's, he has, there's what I've learned basically is that there's definitely, and I'm trying to still find it in terms of these last few interviews that we're doing, but there's definitely a chain of artists, a type of artist that kind of their DNA flows to another type of artist of similar artists, and that keeps on going. And I find that especially true with hip hop, the types of bands that were sampled by the types of hip hop groups that I like. So Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, these kind of more progressive, kind of, jazzy hip hop groups. They were sampling off of these same kinds of artists that Philip was. And then by virtue of that, they've gone on to inspire current artists who are also a little left of center, Tyler the Creator, that type of who cite people like Pharrell as his biggest influences, and Pharrell cites people like Tribe Called Quest and Roy Ayers as his biggest influences, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely like a genealogy in that family tree, and so that's something that I'm still kind of uncovering what that is as the more and more people I talk to, and to me it's so cool that Philip Wu is part of that, and
and now you're part of that chain with him.
I guess so.
He's influenced you.
Yeah, definitely.
And you're making music.
Yeah, definitely. And the other layers of that which are just so weird is that fact that, Woo Art, which the company that I first started working with, they did the videos for Tribe Called Quest.
Right.
And those are the songs that specifically sampled off of Philip Wu, which they didn't even realize at the time. Which was
Dad, we have to pay you licensing rights. We're sorry about that. We forgot.
I know. So it's there's just so many layers there that as we've been talking, you're like, you just keep on opening it up, and you're like, oh wow.
I think that's really great too. Is like they talk about. I think that's a great thread or chain you're going to say to pull on and link and follow. Is that we are standing on the shoulders of giants. Like no one just kind of like invents things from scratch, and it's all based off of our historical knowledge and our own personal influences and where we grew up and the people who influenced us and made us who we are today. Yeah. And so I think it's wonderful that you're creating this film because you were influenced on a personal level as a younger man, and then but also on multiple levels too. You're a filmmaker now with all this experience. You're a musician with all this experience. So it's personal, and also you're also helping gather that knowledge together too. I think that's another piece of the documentary form. I think it's important to people to know is that here we are. You're creating something for public record, and you're amplifying that on a larger platform. And who knows who that'll influence?
Yeah,
right.
That's correct. And I have to thank you and Inwood Art Works for giving us our first grant that we had for it. Part of how I've kind of always worked, and going back to my story about just learning to embrace early on with the band, being an independent, is that you kind of really, once you grasp the DIY method, you really, cherish it and hold on to it, and you build up the skills so you can be truly DIY. And, so for me, like I enjoy editing, and I came up through directing by editing, but I also enjoyed shooting and doing music. So I enjoy learning all these things and being able to do as much as I can on my own. And that's why independent documentaries is great, because sometimes you just don't have the budget to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, you can never do it all on your own. And
absolutely,
and especially something like this where eventually, you want to pay crew, you want to be able to pay, and something like this, now you have to pay for things like music or for the locations, because like the types of artists that we're talking to, and I was just self-funding myself from jobs and stuff, and that gets hard, and so even the most hardcore DIY artists, you need help at some point, and I am so thankful that Inwood Art Works is that help, and the first of hopefully it'll snowball more and get some, but like you guys, it meant a lot. It really meant a lot to myself and the producers.
My pleasure, and let us know how we can help too. It's like we don't just give money, we give guidance, and we give whatever. If you need a shoulder to cry on or a hand to high five, we're there either way, man. And we're excited for where you're going, and we have all the confidence in the world in the show, man. So looking forward to it, man. And also looking forward to your. It's like we had to pick one or kind of. I'm going to get the music in as well as your music, but the documentary is also musicals. So it's like, but we also get you playing up here sometime too, maybe in your band.
I'd love to,
and all that. The Sulu and Excelsior.
I'd love to.
That'd be fun too. And maybe we'll have to have a whole separate setup for a podcast on Sulu and Excelsior, because otherwise we'd be here for 2-3 hours talking about everything.
Oh man, well this is it's fun talking to you about it all. That's for sure.
You bet, man. And just on a note, you're a longtime Washington Heights Uptown resident too. I always like to check in with people You're involved in individual artists. You've raised a family here. You're involved with the 187 Film Festival at that school. Do you still? I mean, and you're hustling like anybody's hustling to create work. So, in your opinion, I feel you're qualified to ask for Uptown if you think this is still a community that continue to support artists and creativity up here.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, when we first moved up here, my kids were babies, but I was blown away by, it was almost Disneyland-esque in that, when you were walking around and you hear music piping out of speakers hidden in the trees in Disney World or something. That's kind of what it felt like when I went here. So as a musician, I'm walking around and I'm hearing, everything from salsa to classical music, individual musicians practicing out of their, literally, I felt like there were 6 pools of sound that I remember walking from the subway to when we started looking at apartments, and I would hear literally just music everywhere, people practicing, people playing it on the street. And, that's New York, but I think there's a part of it which is like, hearing so many different types of musicians practicing up here. It's a place where people can, are really made that long-term decision that this is my life, that I am going to be a working musician. I'm going to be a working artist. And, I say music just because that's, first thing you're literally hearing, but that just kind of set the tone for it here. And since then, like I've met some of my, greatest collaborators up here, my co-producer and longtime kind of partner in crime in terms of the camera. He's always like my, co-camera person, co-director photography on as many projects as I can ever have him on, Jean-Baptiste Sankara. I met him in my building. Literally, like we were both out taking pictures of the same thing. We on the Hudson River, and noticed we both had the same camera and started talking. And just from that became like, a very important lifelong collaborator. That's a big testament to the neighborhood. But beyond that, as you said, the film festival, of which I spent, 9 years working on a school film festival, which ends up being housed at the United Palace Theater. It's, there's no way to kind of epitomize like how much of a community that is until seeing everybody at this place, in one place, and just watching these films. And for me, it was a crazy experience to literally see a neighborhood grow, because I would see kids on screen and I have to put these show reels together, for the whole show. And I would see kids from kindergarten and then see the next year, and then all of a sudden they're graduating and you're like, wow, so it really gave me an attachment to the neighborhood in a way that, it's really special because I'm seeing it through a lens of what I do and, what I love to do. I've just met so many people who are really good friends now that have been from the neighborhood, literally just people talking about what we love to do, on the music side, on the film side, on the performance side.
That's awesome. I love hearing it because it's nothing like music to make you feel welcome, right? Mm-hmm. Or art in general, like a mural, or, if there's a film going on or a film shoot, like the activity, I think it raises everyone's interest, like everyone's curiosity, and also I think, this their general they feel better, they feel happier. I think when they see art in their community happening. Definitely. Whether it's them making it or it's an opera singer out of a window as you're passing by, or someone playing something or working something out. I think it's being part of a creative community creating. I think it's empowering. And even if you're not an artist.
Oh, definitely. It's inspiring just in general. It's inspiring to be around, and it just opens the door to just, I don't know, a better way of living to me. I mean, it's just, I don't know who's playing sometimes, but any given moment, that person that I'm saying hello to, or that's giving me a smile in the morning just to say hello in the morning, it could be that person, and it's pretty amazing, just to think that kind of commitment that kind of talent is just literally surrounding you.
Yeah, and you're riding back with them at 10 o'clock at night in the subway from a gig, and you may have just saw them a Broadway show, and they're the pit musician in it, or they may have been the lead in them.
Yep.
You never know. It just it's a really wonderful. It's really wonderful. Well, thank you for being part of that community and contributing and continuing to contribute, and let us know how we can help, and also where can we send people to find out more about your work?
You could check out. Well, I would say the best place right now would be playinwood.com.
There you go.
Because that is really that and Sulu and Excelsior.com are both very active on that burner, and those also have active social media to all of them. So, but I think those are the big places right now. Because we're really trying to gear up, like you said, we're trying to keep that momentum going from the grant that we got from you guys to get shooting. So we're hopefully going to be able to get everything done and
get it done,
kind of crank it out. And these docs, they take a little bit, but they're really fun to do.
Well, congratulations. Keep up the good work, and we'll see you at the theater.
All right.
Next time, right?
Thank you.
You bet. So thanks again to Steve Mallorca for joining me on this Artist Spotlight episode edition of Inwood Art Works On Air, where you meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home here in Northern Manhattan. If you have a moment here, please show us some love right now and rate and review this podcast on your social media, whatever platform you listen to. 5 stars, leave a comment, share it with your friends. We greatly appreciate it. Many thanks to the Good Shepherd community here for hosting us, and to HeightSites.com for uptown promotional support. You can support On Air, by the way, and all of our free programming, making a donation. Yes, 100% tax-free at InwoodArtWorks.nyc/donate or via Venmo at Inwood Artworks. We greatly appreciate it. You can support On Air, by the way, and in other ways on social media. Keep All That We Do, which includes the Inwood Film Festival, Filmworks Al Fresco, live performances, and so much more. Inwood Art Works On Air is proud to be supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. And our programming is made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Art Works On Air.